There's a reason she never forgets the man who went silent. Not the one who begged for closure. Not the one who sent long paragraphs at 2 a.m. Not the one who argued, explained, or tried to prove his worth. Those men become background noise, forgettable echoes of need. But the one who vanished quietly, without words, without reaction, that's the one who lingers in her mind long after you're gone. Because silence isn't absence. It's gravity. It pulls at her thoughts when she tries to move on. It echoes in the spaces where your presence used to be. It makes her question everything she thought she understood about you and about herself. A woman can forget your voice, but she will never forget how your silence made her feel. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't a tactic. It was transformation. The day you stopped explaining yourself was the day she started remembering who you really were. Because when you no longer chase, when you no longer argue, when you no longer seek validation, something changes. You stop being a man trying to be understood and become the man she can't stop trying to figure out. This is the truth. Most men never learn when your silence speaks louder than her validation. You don't lose power. You become it. In this video, we'll uncover the Stoic psychology behind silence, why walking away without a word rewires her mind, why your stillness becomes her obsession, and why the man who stops chasing becomes the one she can never replace. Stay until the end, because once you understand the hidden power behind your silence, you'll never need to raise your voice again. This is Stoic Truth 101, where silence becomes strength, and strength becomes unforgettable. At first, she doesn't notice it, the silence. She assumes it's temporary, just another phase, another mood swing, another attempt to get her attention. She's seen men do this before, disappear for a few days, act distant, then crawl back with apologies and explanations. She expects the same from you, but she doesn't realize this time something has shifted. You're not retreating to manipulate. You're detaching to protect your peace. And that's what her ego can't process. When a woman's ego meets silence, it feels like a mirror being held to her reflection, one she didn't ask to look into. Suddenly, she can't distract herself with your attention. There are no messages to respond to, no validation to absorb, no energy to feed on. For the first time, she's left alone with her own thoughts. And the human ego hates silence because silence exposes truth. In that quiet void, her mind begins to replay everything. The last argument, the last look in your eyes, the tone of your voice when you said, "Take care." She replays it, not because she misses you yet, but because she can't stand the uncertainty. The ego thrives on control, and your silence steals it away. She can't label you as angry, desperate, or heartbroken because you've given her nothing to label. That's the brilliance of stillness. It forces her to sit in confusion, and confusion, over time, breeds curiosity. See, most men lose power because they panic when they feel distance. They overreact, over-explain, overcompensate. They hand their power away in emotional installments, one message at a time. They think their words can repair attraction, but every word only exposes how attached they still are. And attachment to the feminine ego feels like surrender. But when you go silent, when you detach completely, not from anger, but from clarity, you do something most men never do. You introduce doubt into her certainty. Now, she's not sure anymore. She thought she knew you. She thought you'd always be the one to chase, to fold, to come back. But this version of you, calm, still, unreadable, doesn't fit the story she built in her head. And that's what begins to haunt her. In her mind, she begins asking questions that don't have answers. Did he stop caring? Is he really done? Is he seeing someone else? Those questions become louder in the silence. Because silence is not empty. It's full of meaning, full of implication, full of what the mind cannot control. Every minute you stay quiet, her ego begins to crumble, and her curiosity begins to rise. Because the truth is, the feminine mind is wired to respond to emotional polarity. When something is too available, it becomes predictable. When something becomes predictable, it becomes invisible. But when something once available suddenly withdraws without explanation, it triggers something primal, the chase. And yet, your silence isn't about chasing or winning. It's about reclaiming the only thing you ever truly owned, your emotional self-control. That's what the Stoics understood. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." When you become calm in the storm she created, you change the dynamic completely. You're no longer reacting to her energy. You're leading your own. She expected a reaction, not reflection. She expected you to fight for her validation, not your peace. She expected the same pattern, not evolution. And evolution always feels like rejection to the unevolved. Days pass. She posts more, laughs louder, tries to project indifference. But every performance hides the same question: why didn't he react? Because in her mind, your silence is not absence, it's dominance. She can't explain it, but she feels it. Every time her phone lights up, and it's not you. She feels that quiet sting. Every time she opens social media and sees nothing from you, she wonders if you've truly moved on, or worse, if you've outgrown her. And that's the deepest cut of all. Because to the female ego, being forgotten is worse than being rejected. Rejection can be argued with, negotiated, explained. But being forgotten, that means her power failed. That's why your silence hits harder than any speech. Because it wasn't revenge, it was restraint. It wasn't cold, it was composed. It wasn't manipulation, it was mastery. The man who learns to stay silent doesn't need to prove he's strong. His stillness says everything. In a world where everyone is screaming to be seen, the man who withdraws becomes a mystery. And mystery, to the mind of a woman who once had control, is unbearable. That's the paradox of silence. It doesn't scream, yet it echoes. It doesn't chase, yet it pulls. It doesn't explain, yet it teaches. When her ego meets your stillness, she begins to realize you were never the one who needed her validation. She was the one who needed your attention to feel powerful. And now, Stripped of that power, she's forced to see what she lost. You didn't walk away to hurt her. You walked away to heal yourself. And in doing so, you became unforgettable. The truth is simple but brutal. Once she can predict you, she stops respecting you. At first, your consistency felt comforting to her. She knew you would text, "Good morning." She knew you'd call when she pulled away. She knew that no matter what, you'd be there steady, reliable, ready to fix whatever storm she created. But comfort and respect are not the same thing. What comforts her doesn't challenge her, and what doesn't challenge her, she eventually takes for granted. Most men confuse reliability with strength. They think showing up constantly, forgiving endlessly, and explaining repeatedly will earn them love. But love doesn't grow where respect dies. And predictability, that's the silent killer of respect. She stopped being curious about you the moment she could read your every move. You became safe. Not sacred. Accessible. Not admirable. She could hurt you and still know exactly how you'd respond, with patience, with softness, with the same old words. That's when the shift happens. You didn't lose her because you were a bad man. You lost her because you became predictable. Predictability removes the unknown, and attraction feeds on uncertainty. It's not chaos that draws her, it's polarity. The balance between your warmth and your restraint, between accessibility and mystery, between emotion and control. When a man is emotionally reactive, he becomes her puppet. When a man is emotionally still, he becomes her test. See, she doesn't consciously want drama, but she subconsciously craves emotional tension. Not because she's manipulative, but because tension signals value. The higher your value, the harder it is to read you. The harder you are to read, the more her mind stays locked on you. That's how attraction works. It's not just about love, it's about psychological stimulation. But here's where most men fail. They mistake predictability for loyalty. They think that being always available shows devotion, but in her subconscious, always available means always replaceable. When she knows your next message, your next reaction, your next move, she stops feeling anything, because emotion is born in uncertainty. Now, think about what happened the moment you went silent. The pattern broke. The script she memorized suddenly stopped working. For the first time, she didn't know what you were thinking, and that uncertainty shook her. She told herself, "You'd reach out again, he always does." But days passed. Then weeks. Still nothing. That's when curiosity turned into anxiety. And anxiety is the seed of attraction reborn. Your silence reintroduced the one thing she'd lost: mystery. And mystery is what fuels fascination. You see, when you remove yourself from the script, she loses the comfort of control. She can't predict your next move, because even you aren't trying to control the outcome anymore. You're not playing her game. You're done with games altogether. You've detached. And that's the most unpredictable thing a man can do in a world where everyone's fighting for validation. She starts checking your page more than you check hers. She starts asking about you in subtle ways. Not because she misses the old version of you, but because she doesn't recognize the new one. and that confusion keeps her mentally tied to you. The predictable man was easy to dismiss, but the unreadable man, that's the one who haunts her. You've shifted from being her emotional safety net to being her psychological challenge, and that change in polarity forces her to reassess your value not through what you give, but through what you withhold. As Marcus Aurelius said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." When you stop explaining yourself, you remove noise, and in that silence, she hears something new: strength. Stoic men understand this paradox. You don't gain respect by trying to prove yourself. You gain it by showing you no longer need to. Predictability is a symptom of attachment. It means your actions depend on her reactions. Detachment, on the other hand, is sovereignty. It means your actions depend only on your principles. And a man who acts from principle, not emotion, becomes unsharkable. When she said goodbye, she expected you to crumble. When you didn't, she felt the imbalance. Because control, real control, is never in the one who speaks first, but in the one who can stay silent the longest. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's command. It's the quiet authority that says, "My peace is no longer for sale." Most men talk because they want to be understood. Stoic men stay silent because they already understand, and that's what unsettles her the most. She can't argue with silence. She can't win against stillness. She can't control a man who doesn't need her attention to feel complete. When you stop being predictable, you stop being replaceable. Because mystery can't be replicated, only remembered, and she'll remember you, not for what you said, but for the one moment she realized you stopped chasing and started leading yourself. When you disappear, something strange happens. The world doesn't stop but in her mind. You don't fade. You echo. You become a thought that returns when the noise dies down. A shadow that follows her laughter. A name that appears in silence. Not because you're doing anything, but because you stopped doing everything. That's the paradox. When a man withdraws completely, his absence begins to speak louder than his presence ever did. At first, she tells herself she's fine. She tells her friends she's moved on, that she doesn't care, that you were too distant anyway. But late at night, when the phone is quiet and her mind starts wandering, the silence becomes unbearable. Because silence is not empty, it's a psychological projection machine. The mind hates uncertainty, and when you give it nothing to hold on to, it starts building stories to fill the void. She replays moments, reconstructs meanings, invents reasons. She tells herself, he must be talking to someone else. Maybe he stopped caring, or maybe he finally realized his worth. The longer you stay silent, the more her imagination works against her peace. You stopped being a man she saw. You became a question she couldn't answer. And unanswered questions linger far longer than explanations ever could. Because the human ego, especially a wounded one, can't rest without closure. See, when you were available, she could measure your emotions. When you argued, she could feel your anger. When you explained, she could feed off your validation. But when you went quiet, truly quiet, you took away her only source of certainty. Now, she can't measure your heart, your plans, or your attention. All she can measure is the absence, and that absence grows heavier each day. That's when her mind begins to turn against itself. Every scenario she imagines becomes another form of punishment. Was he ever serious? Did I overplay my hand? What if he's truly moved on? The truth is, she doesn't fear losing you. She fears losing the version of herself that existed when she had your attention. Your silence forces her to confront a void inside her that was never really about you. It was about what she needed you to confirm her worth. And now that confirmation is gone. In Stoic philosophy, Seneca wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay. Silence is that delay." It's not about passive waiting. It's about letting the emotional storm burn itself out. By saying nothing, you don't suppress the chaos. You let it consume itself. You become the mountain while the storm passes. You remain unmoved. Unshaken. Untouchable. Every word she expected from you would have been fuel for her ego's fire. But silence starves it. She starts searching for signs, checking your stories, scrolling through old messages, rereading texts, not because she misses the words, but because she misses the certainty behind them. That's the irony. She's not addicted to you. She's addicted to what your attention once made her feel. And now, she's in withdrawal. You see, in a world where everyone overshares, mystery becomes a luxury. Most men hand out their emotions like discounts, texting too soon, explaining too much, posting too often. But the man who goes silent becomes rare. And in psychology, rarity equals value, because the less she knows about you, the more her mind works to define you, and every story she writes in your absence only magnifies your presence. This is how obsession begins, not through attention, but through uncertainty, because attention satisfies curiosity, but mystery multiplies it. The man she once understood is gone. In his place stands a mystery, a figure she can't decode, a silence she can't ignore. And every time she tries to move on, that mystery pulls her back in, not because you said something powerful, but because you stopped speaking altogether. Your absence becomes her new addiction. It's not your messages she wants, it's your validation, reimagined through memory. And memory, under the pressure of silence, always disto. It turns you from a man into a myth. That's the secret Stoics understood. You don't chase to be remembered, you withdraw to be understood. And sometimes, to be understood, you must say nothing at all. When her mind starts echoing your silence, you've already won. Not because she suffers, but because you've reclaimed the power that used to be tied to her reactions. You no longer need her to see your worth. Because now, she sees it everywhere. She looks in the gap you left behind, in the peace you took with you, in the quiet she can't escape. That's the beauty of detachment. You don't destroy what hurt you. You outgrow it so completely that it starts missing you. She doesn't realize it yet, but the silence that torments her is the same silence that healed you. You're no longer reacting to her story. You've become the chapter she'll never stop rereading. At first, distance feels like freedom to her. She tells herself she needed space. that she's fine, that she just needs time to find herself. But silence has a way of changing shape. What once felt like peace soon turns into pressure, not from you, but from the absence you created. See, when you were close, she could manage you. She knew your tone, your reactions, your presence. She could reach you with a text, an apology, a small gesture. You were there, emotionally available, always within reach. But when you withdrew, not out of spite, but out of clarity, the emotional distance you created became something she couldn't measure. And what the human mind can't measure, it begins to magnify. At first, she mistakes your distance for indifference. She thinks, he's probably just busy, but days stretch into weeks. And that quiet begins to echo louder than any argument. It's no longer you she's thinking about, it's what's missing. Because absence has weight. The less you say, the heavier it feels. She used to find comfort in your attention. It gave her reassurance, identity, importance. But now, your silence forces her to face something she spent her whole life avoiding herself. The mind resists stillness. It needs stimulation, validation, noise. Without it, the ego starts to panic. And when the ego panics, it creates stories to protect itself. That's when she begins to rationalize. He's probably trying to make me jealous. He'll come back eventually. He's doing this to get a reaction. Because admitting the truth that you've moved beyond her emotional reach would mean facing her own loss of power. But deep down, she feels it. She doesn't fear losing you. She fears the void you left behind. Because that void exposes how much of her confidence was built on your presence. Every time she opens her phone and doesn't see your name, the void grows. Every time she scrolls past your profile and sees nothing, the silence becomes heavier. Every time someone mentions you and she pretends not to care, she feels the weight of what's missing press deeper into her chest. That's the paradox of distance. It's not about separation. It's about gravity. The further you pull away, the more she feels your pull. She'll try to replace it: distractions, attention, conversations, but nothing fits the shape of your absence. Because your silence doesn't compete. It contrasts. And contrast creates awareness. Awareness of what she lost. Awareness of what she took for granted. Awareness of the peace you brought when you were still there. Most men never understand this. You don't lose a woman by walking away. You lose her when you become predictable, reactive, and emotionally dependent. But the moment you step back truly, calmly, she starts to feel the psychological weight of what's no longer hers to control. That's when your absence becomes a mirror, not for her to see you, but to see herself. Every unreturned text, every unread message, every unanswered thought reflects her own behavior back to her. Because silence is the most honest mirror, it shows what words try to hide. And the reflection is not easy to look at. She starts questioning herself. Did I push him too far? Was I wrong? Why does this feel so heavy? Because what's missing isn't your voice. It's the validation her ego once fed on. In Stoic philosophy, there's a concept called apatheia, the strength to feel without being ruled by feeling. That's what you've embraced. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not angry. You're aligned. You're not punishing her. You're protecting your peace. And in a world where everyone reacts instantly, that kind of restraint feels supernatural. Your calmness becomes contrast. Your detachment becomes dominance. The emotional distance she now feels is not cruelty, it's consequence. Because what she's truly facing is not rejection, but reflection. You've given her nothing to argue with, nothing to fix, nothing to control, and that nothing becomes everything. It sits in her mind like a weight she can't lift, a silence she can't silence. Over time, that emotional distance turns from confusion to realization. She begins to see that your absence isn't about punishment, it's about evolution. You didn't withdraw to make her chase, you withdrew to make yourself free. And in that freedom, you became something she can't reach, not because you're hiding, but because you've outgrown the level where her validation mattered. That's the kind of distance that doesn't fade, it transforms. It turns you from a memory into a lesson, from a presence into a standard, from a man she once understood into a silence she'll never forget. Because when you stop showing up for her chaos, you start showing up for your peace. And that's the moment she realizes, you didn't disappear, you evolved. Detachment isn't weakness, it's mastery. It's the quiet shift that happens when a man stops reacting and starts ruling not over others, but over himself. See, most men believe dominance means control. They think if they can get her to listen, to respond, to miss them, they've won. But that's not power. That's dependency dressed as control. Real dominance isn't about how much influence you have over someone else's emotions. It's about how little influence their emotions have over you. The Stoics understood this long before psychology had a name for it. Epictetus said, "He who rules himself cannot be ruled by others." That's detachment, not escape, not indifference, but inner sovereignty. When you detach, you reclaim every piece of energy that you once gave away trying to be understood, validated, or chosen. You stop handing out emotional access to people who haven't earned it. You stop negotiating your peace just to maintain connection. Because connection that costs your peace is nothing but bondage disguised as love. And here's the part most men never realize: the moment you detach, you stop chasing. When you stop chasing, you stop bleeding energy. And when your energy stops leaking, your presence becomes powerful again. That's why detachment feels like dominance. Because it's the first time in a long time that you're moving from choice, not reaction. You no longer need her to reply. You no longer need her to validate you. You no longer need her to understand your worth, because you've already understood it yourself. That's when the dynamic flips. The same silence that once made her feel powerful now makes her restless. The same calm that once seemed like distance now feels like mystery. Because your energy no longer bends toward her, it stands tall within itself. You're not cold. You're composed. You're not punishing. You're protecting. And she can feel that difference deeply. She expected anger. She expected guilt. She expected an argument she could win. But what she got instead was nothing. And nothing, when it comes from a man who once cared, carries the weight of everything. That's the paradox of detachment. It doesn't pull you away from life. It places you above it. You stop needing outcomes to go your way because your peace no longer depends on outcomes. You don't withdraw from the world. You rise above its chaos. In Stoic thought, this is called self-command, the highest form of freedom. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is a slave to his passions." And that's what detachment truly is, freedom from emotional slavery. Most men live in reaction. She texts, they respond. She ignores, they panic. She comes back, they forgive instantly. Their peace is dictated by her attention. But the man who learns the discipline of detachment no longer moves like that. He doesn't respond from emotion. He responds from principle. He doesn't chase validation. He generates value. He doesn't seek control. He embodies calm. Because once a man becomes emotionally still, the entire game changes. She's no longer pulling his strings. She's wondering how he cut them. That's the kind of power no argument can match, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that can walk away without bitterness, look back without resentment, and live forward without regret. When you reach this level, your silence becomes your authority. Every man who's ever mastered himself understands this truth. You don't dominate through noise. You dominate through presence. The more disciplined your energy becomes, the more others feel it even in your absence. It's what psychologists now call emotional gravity, the way calm energy pulls attention without trying. You've probably felt it yourself, that quiet, unbothered presence that makes everyone else adjust their tone. That's what detachment creates. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. It's not indifference, it's intention. You've simply stopped fighting for things that don't require your war anymore. And this is what truly terrifies her. You're no longer reactive. You're reflective. You're no longer accessible. You're ascended. You're no longer playing her game, you've transcended it. That's why she'll test you again. That's why she'll reach out when she feels your distance. Because the ego can't stand losing control over what once responded to it. But this time, her tests don't work. Her silence no longer manipulates your emotions. Because now, your silence carries more meaning than her words ever could. Detachment doesn't make you untouchable, it makes you unshakable. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about mastering the art of caring without losing yourself. When you can look at what once had power over you and feel nothing but calm understanding, you've already won. Not because you've conquered her, but because you've conquered the part of yourself that once needed her. That's real dominance. Not in the world. Not over here. But over yourself. You've become the Stoic warrior, silent, grounded, unmovable, not because the world stopped testing you, but because you stopped reacting to its tests. And from this place, you no longer chase attraction. You command it. You no longer beg for respect. You embody it. You no longer explain your worth. You live it. Because when a man controls nothing but himself, he owns everything. Time doesn't just pass, it edits. And silence, when held long enough, becomes the editor-in-chief of memory. You see, when you stop feeding a person new emotions, their mind begins to rewrite the old ones. The arguments fade. The flaws blur. The pain softens, and what remains isn't the truth, but the version that their heart can live with, That's how myths are born. At first, she remembers every detail, the tension, the distance, the reasons it ended. But as the weeks turn into months, something strange happens. Her memory starts protecting her ego by rearranging the past. She stops remembering why she left. She starts remembering how it felt when you were there. It's not manipulation on your part. You didn't plan this. You didn't need to. Silence did the work for you. Because when you remove your voice, you remove resistance. And when there's no new version of you to react to, her mind fills the silence with imagination. She doesn't miss you. She misses the peace she felt when she didn't have to control you. She misses the version of herself that existed when you were still near. She misses the safety of knowing that if she reached out, you'd still be there. But you're not. And that absence, that quiet, unshakable absence, begins to haunt her more than any words could. At first, she tries to move on. She distracts herself, fills her days with noise, laughter, attention. But late at night, when everything slows down, the silence returns. It plays like a loop, not of what happened, but of what could have been. And here's where the human mind becomes its own prison. The brain can't stand unanswered questions. It craves closure, even if closure means rewriting history. So she starts rewriting. You're no longer the man who frustrated her. You're the man who understood her. You're no longer the one who walked away. You're the one who stayed strong. She doesn't remember the arguments. She remembers the moments when your calm made her feel safe. She doesn't remember what you said. She remembers the tone, the steadiness, the restraint. And the more she rewrites, the more idealized you become. Because now, she's not comparing you to reality. She's comparing you to the fragments her mind preserved. And memory, especially emotional memory, always romanticizes what it's lost. That's why silence is more powerful than persuasion, because persuasion tries to convince, silence forces reflection. Words can be twisted, actions can be doubted, but silence becomes sacred. It's untouchable, unexplainable, and impossible to argue with. You gave her nothing to resist, nothing to resent, and that's exactly why you linger. When she checks your profile now, it's not to find flaws, it's to search for clues. When she asks mutual friends about you, it's not from indifference, it's from nostalgia, disguised as curiosity. She doesn't realize it yet. But she's not chasing you. She's chasing her own rewritten version of you, the man her memory sculpted out of silence. That's the irony of emotional distance. You stopped existing in her world, and in doing so, became the only thing she can't escape. Because the mind can't fight what it can't touch, and silence gives it nothing to fight, only space to imagine. It's in that imagination that your legend begins. The more she tries to forget, the stronger the image becomes. The more she tries to move on, the more her subconscious drags her back to what's unresolved. She starts dreaming of you, not because she wants to, but because her psyche is searching for meaning. It replays the moments, reconstructs the warmth, and fills in the blanks with fantasy. And that fantasy, polished, perfected, purified by time, becomes untouchable. You've stopped being a man in her story. You've become the myth that her heart keeps whispering about. That's the paradox. The less you exist in her reality, the more you dominate her memory, the less you speak. The more your silence becomes a voice inside her head, the less you reach out, the more your absence pulls her in. You never needed to convince her that you mattered. All you needed was patience, because time always rewrites in favor of what remains still. That's why the Stoics spoke so highly of restraint. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Let time speak. It's the only voice that never lies," because time has a way of clearing the noise and revealing the truth. Not the truth you argue for, but the truth that silence reveals. You didn't win by proving her wrong. You won by letting the world and her own conscience prove you right. Now, your name doesn't bring conflict, it brings quiet. Your image doesn't stir anger, it stirs reflection. And when she remembers you now, it's not with resentment, it's with reverence. That's what makes silence so divine. It doesn't just erase, it refines. It turns pain into perspective, emotion into wisdom, loss into legend. And while she's busy trying to move forward, you've already transcended. You've become something she'll tell herself she doesn't think about until she does. Not because you shouted, not because you begged, but because you left her with the one thing the human mind can never quiet: curiosity. Silence doesn't just end stories, it rewrites them. And when you let time hold the pen, the man who left becomes the man she can never forget. There comes a point when silence stops being a strategy and becomes your nature. You no longer stay quiet to make a point, to prove strength, or to win a game. You stay quiet because peace has become your language. This is the stage where the man who once fought for attention no longer needs to be seen to feel significant. He doesn't need to prove his worth to anyone, because he finally understands real power doesn't announce itself, it emanates. You're no longer chasing validation, you're radiating presence. You've reached the place Marcus Aurelius called self-mastery, where a man becomes his own fortress. See, there's something magnetic about stillness. It's not passive, it's powerful. Because when the world expects you to react, and you don't, you shift the entire dynamic. You break the pattern of chaos that feeds weak minds. You no longer dance to someone else's rhythm. You move to your own inner tempo. That's why your stillness haunts her. Not because she can't hear you, but because she can't predict you anymore. She feels your absence like gravity, invisible, silent, but undeniably there. It pulls at her thoughts, her emotions, her curiosity. She wonders, how can he be so calm? Why doesn't he need me? What is he doing now? But the truth is, you're not doing anything for her to notice. You're doing everything for yourself. Your silence has become your discipline. Your focus has become your redemption. And your growth has become your response to everything that once hurt you. That's what true transformation looks like. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's consistent. It's the quiet rebuilding of a man who no longer operates from pain, but from purpose. The Stoics called it living in accordance with nature, meaning aligning your actions with reason, not emotion. And once you reach that state, your silence stops being a shield. It becomes your signature. She might not admit it, but she feels it. When your name comes up, the air changes. When someone mentions you, her eyes shift. Not because she still loves you, but because your calm now exposes her chaos. You're no longer a chapter in her story. You're the punctuation mark that ended it. And every time she remembers you, it's not anger that returns, it's awe. Because you didn't collapse. You didn't beg. You didn't explain. You simply disappeared into your purpose. That's what separates men who move on from men who evolve. Most move on by replacing someone, but you replaced attachment with awareness. You replaced closure with clarity. You replaced her validation with your vision. And when a man does that, he stops being a memory. He becomes a lesson. He becomes a standard. He becomes the reminder every future man in her life will fail to live up to. Because what she misses now isn't you, it's who she was when you saw her differently. It's the peace she felt in your presence. The gravity she couldn't find anywhere else. And that's the cruel poetry of silence. It turns you from noise into nostalgia, from emotion into echo, from man into myth.